My wife's descent. From new job to infidelity. Drugs. And tragedy. How our marriage unraveled in just 4.5 months. The beginning of a story often sets the stage for what lies ahead. Sometimes filled with hope and promise. Other times leading into an abyss of unforeseen pain. For John, a man in his mid-30s, it all started with what seemed like an ordinary change. His wife, Emily, got a new job. John didn't know that this change would be the catalyst for a series of events that would unravel his entire world in just a matter of months. Emily was excited to start her new job, thrilled about the prospects and the people she met there. John was happy for her. It had been a long time since she seemed so enthusiastic about something. As time went by, however, her new social circle began to raise red flags. She spent more time away from home, and the friends she brought around seemed abrasive, always critical of everyone around them. John didn't feel comfortable with them, but he kept his reservations to himself. He didn't want to dampen her happiness. Gradually, Emily's behavior toward John began to change. She grew distant, her warmth replaced with resentment. The simplest of actions, like John holding the door for her, would trigger an argument. She accused him of being controlling, of upholding patriarchal values, and even said he was born evil because he was a man. The John she once loved became, in her eyes, a representation of everything she despised. This was not the Emily John knew, not the one he fell in love with and married 11 years ago. They had built a life together, had 2 beautiful children, a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. But in the span of a few weeks, the foundation of their marriage was crumbling, and John couldn't understand why. He tried to reason with her, tried to remind her of the love they had shared for over a decade. But his words fell on deaf ears. Emily seemed determined to push him away. One night, Emily came home late, drunk and dismissive of John's concerns. When he asked where she had been, she accused him of being overbearing. She told him that he read too much into things and that he had no right to question her. John was left feeling helpless, a stranger in his own home, his partner slipping further away from him each day. A few weeks later, Emily brought up the idea of an open relationship over breakfast. She said it as if it were the most casual thing in the world. As if the concept of sharing herself with other men was perfectly normal. John felt a chill run down his spine. He had already suspected infidelity, and this conversation only confirmed his worst fears. Emily had changed, and she was no longer the woman he had vowed to spend his life with. John's instincts kicked in. He decided to stay calm, to collect evidence, and to protect himself and his children. He recorded their conversation and began documenting everything. He had read enough stories on the internet to know that the road ahead was fraught with challenges, and that the legal system often worked against fathers in custody battles. He needed to be prepared for whatever came next. When John confronted Emily about her infidelity, she initially tried to deny it. But when she realized that he wasn't going to back down, she confessed. She admitted to having 2 one-night stands and said she planned to continue pursuing other men because it made her feel empowered. She even mentioned that one of her coworkers was in an open relationship and that she wanted the same for them. John was heartbroken. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to have no regard for their marriage, their family, or the life they had built together. Emily's attitude was unapologetic, almost indifferent. She showed no remorse for her actions, no empathy for the pain she was causing. John knew at that moment that their marriage was over. Over the next few weeks, John focused on safeguarding his children and preparing for the inevitable divorce. Emily continued her reckless behavior, spending nights away from home, neglecting their children, and immersing herself deeper into a lifestyle that seemed to be spiraling out of control. She surrounded herself with people who encouraged her behavior, who told her that she deserved better than John and that he was the one holding her back. The breaking point came when Emily's behavior put their children at risk. She drove drunk one night, with their children in the car, and crashed into a house. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, but it was enough for John to take legal action. He filed for full custody, citing her reckless and dangerous behavior. He installed cameras around their home, documented everything, and made sure that he had enough evidence to protect his children from the chaos that Emily had brought into their lives. As the divorce proceedings began, Emily's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She refused to get a lawyer, showed up late to meetings, and continued to push for an open relationship. Even as their marriage was ending, she brought one of her friends to a legal meeting, a woman who seemed more interested in causing trouble than in helping Emily navigate the situation. John, on the other hand, remained composed. He followed his lawyer's advice, stayed calm, and focused on what mattered most, his children. He knew that this wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about protecting his family from further harm and making sure that his children had a stable and loving environment to grow up in. Emily's downward spiral continued after the divorce was finalized. She lost her job, her friends distanced themselves from her, and she fell deeper into substance abuse. Her own parents, unable to watch her destroy herself, intervened and had her committed to a rehabilitation facility. It was there that John received the news that she had passed away. The official cause was an overdose. But to John, it felt like she had been on this path for a long time, a path of self-destruction that no one could pull her away from. The news of Emily's death hit John hard. Despite everything she had done, despite the pain she had caused, she was still the mother of his children, and there had been a time when she was his world. He grieved for her, not just for the woman she had become, but for the woman she once was, the woman he had loved, the mother of his children, the partner he had built a life with. In the months that followed, John focused on rebuilding his life. He poured his energy into his children, making sure that they knew they were loved and that they had a stable home. He worked hard to create new memories with them, memories that weren't tainted by the pain of the past. He wanted his children to remember their mother for the good times, not for the chaos that had defined her final months. John also took time to reflect on his own journey. He realized that he had lost himself in his marriage, that he had allowed his identity to be defined by his role as a husband and a father. With Emily gone, he had to find himself again, to rediscover who he was outside of the roles he had played for so long. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. But he knew that he had to keep going, not just for himself, but for his children. Through therapy and the support of friends and family, John slowly began to heal. He learned to let go of the guilt and the pain, to forgive himself for not being able to save Emily, and to focus on the future. He knew that there would always be a part of him that grieved for what could have been. But he also knew that he couldn't let that grief define him. He had to be strong, not just for himself, but for his children, who looked to him for stability and love. John's story is not just one of heartbreak and loss, it is also a story of resilience and hope. It is a story of a man who faced the unimaginable and came out the other side. Not unscathed, but stronger. It is a reminder that even in the face of the deepest pain, there is always hope for healing, for growth, and for a better future. I never imagined that the very people I called family would one day be the ones to try to strip away everything I had worked for. The home I had poured my heart and savings into became a battleground for a twisted game of family power, deceit, and misplaced priorities. But what happened through that turmoil shaped me more than anything in my life, teaching me not only about trust but about setting boundaries, something far more precious than a house. If you think this is a typical story of family drama, you're in for a ride. Because what follows involves an unbelievable series of betrayals, self-discovery, and a wake-up call that I never saw coming. It started the day I got a call from my dad. He wasn't exactly the affectionate type. He was more of a distant figure in my life, a man who seemed to think that fatherhood could be managed from afar, with the occasional burst of shallow demands and unsolicited advice. My mother, in her strength and compassion, had always been the real guiding light in my life. When she passed away, it was like a piece of stability I depended on had been yanked away without warning, leaving only a void filled by my father's erratic attempts to play dad again. My father, who I'll call Michael, was remarried to a woman named Marissa. Marissa wasn't evil incarnate or anything, but she had an opportunistic streak and a shallow set of values that made me wary. I always felt she was out for herself. She moved into our lives soon after my mom passed away, and not long after, her daughter Ash, my half-sister, entered the picture. Ash was 5 years younger than me and had always enjoyed a kind of privilege that I could never understand. To my father, she was his golden girl. He overlooked her every mistake, her reckless life choices, and her repeated failures, treating them like rites of passage rather than what they really were, terrible decisions that would eventually catch up to her. Ash was, to put it bluntly, spoiled. She had this aura of entitlement that grated on me. It wasn't just that she made poor decisions, it was the way she expected everyone else to clean up after her messes. She flaunted a lifestyle that glorified excess, escorting for money, spending long hours on OnlyFans, trying to grab whatever attention she could get. My father, blinded by his obsession with his pride and joy, never saw the harm in it, never questioned her actions, and never stopped to think about the consequences. To him, she could do no wrong. But eventually, those consequences did come, and they came fast. I had been living away from home for a while, working hard, saving up, and finally moving into a modest house of my own. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, bought with the sweat of my brow. A physical representation of my independence. Just as I was getting used to the new place, I decided that a housewarming party was in order. I thought that perhaps, for once, I should try to involve my family. Perhaps there was some part of me that still craved a connection with my dad, a longing for some reconciliation. I invited them, hoping for a pleasant gathering, hoping for normalcy. The day of the housewarming was surreal. My father came in, looking around the house with eyes that didn't hold pride or love, but jealousy. He commented on the furniture, the design, the arches in the doorways, and I could tell that there was something brewing behind his composed smile. My stepmother Marissa hung in the background, her sharp eyes scanning the rooms, almost as if assessing their worth. Then there was Ash, who barely glanced around, distracted by her phone, not even attempting to pretend she cared. It wasn't the warm family reunion I had imagined, and soon I found myself cornered by my father in the kitchen. He asked me to sit down, and I could tell this wasn't going to be good. Without much preamble, he laid it out plainly. Ash, pregnant and unable to work, needed my house. He made it sound like a simple, reasonable request. She's your sister, he said. It's what family does. But it wasn't just about giving her a place to stay, it was about giving her everything, the house, financial support, and even the responsibility of managing the household. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father wanted me to give up my hard-earned home for someone who didn't value anything but herself. I refused, as gently as I could, but it was like talking to a wall. My father grew angry, his face reddening as he spoke about familial duty, about how a real brother would do anything for his sister. He spat out words like sacrifice and responsibility, as though they had any meaning when used by someone who had neglected me for most of my life. I stood my ground, though it took every ounce of strength I had. I wasn't going to let my stepsister's mistakes ruin the life I had built for myself. Eventually, I left the conversation, my father still yelling behind me, Marissa shaking her head as if I had disappointed them beyond repair. It wasn't long after this disastrous family meeting that Ash reached out to me. She wanted to meet and talk, just the two of us. We met at a coffee shop, and she seemed nervous, unlike her usual overconfident self. She told me about her struggles, how she felt trapped in a cycle of bad decisions, how her mother had pushed her into the escort lifestyle, convincing her that it was the best way to make quick money. I could tell there was regret in her voice, maybe a hint of shame, but there was also an undeniable streak of entitlement. She wanted me to go along with my father's request and give her the house, just until she got back on her feet. It would only be temporary, she claimed. I listened, and I empathized, but I couldn't bring myself to say yes. I asked her if she had other options, other family members, a friend she could stay with, a different way to support herself, but she brushed off my suggestions. She seemed to believe that my home was her only answer. I told her no, and though she didn't take it well, I felt a sense of relief as I walked away. It was a relief that came with knowing I was setting boundaries for myself. Something I should have done a long time ago. That should have been the end of it. But my curiosity got the better of me. There was something about Marissa that had always made me uneasy. Something that seemed to lurk beneath her polished exterior. One evening, I decided to follow her. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe I was just hoping to confirm my suspicions. She left the house and drove to what was supposed to be her yoga class. Except it wasn't. I watched as she pulled up to a small parking lot, got out, and approached another car. A man was waiting there for her, and they embraced before getting into the car together. It felt like my stomach dropped out from under me. I stood there, watching, feeling a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief. I wanted to confront her, but I also knew that this was beyond me. My father deserved to know. even if I was the last person he wanted to hear it from. I didn't tell him immediately. I let the knowledge simmer, waiting for the right moment. That moment came one night when my father, Marissa, and Ash showed up at my house again, demanding that I reconsider. They refused to leave, even as I asked them to. And I finally snapped. I told my father about Marissa's betrayal, about the man I had seen her with. At first, he denied it, said I must be mistaken, but I showed him the video I had taken. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. My father stared at the screen, his face drained of color. Marissa sputtering excuses that he didn't seem to hear. He turned to her, and the look in his eyes was something I'll never forget: hurt, betrayal, realization. It was like everything he had built his life around had come crashing down in an instant. The fallout was quick. My father filed for divorce, and Marissa and Ash moved out of his house. I heard through mutual contacts that they ended up in a shelter temporarily. And my father became a shell of the man he used to be, silent, withdrawn, constantly replaying the choices that had led him to this point. He reached out to me, asking for help finding a therapist. For the first time in my life, I saw him as vulnerable, as someone who needed guidance, who had lost his way. I helped him as best I could, though I knew that it would take time, maybe forever, for him to come to terms with everything. Through all of this, I realized something crucial. Family is important, but it doesn't give people the right to take advantage of you. It doesn't give them the right to cross boundaries, to demand sacrifices that you aren't willing to make. Loving someone means respecting them, and that includes respecting their choices, their space, their lives. My father, Marissa, and Ash all had their own ideas of what family meant, but they were distorted by selfishness and misplaced expectations. I learned to let go of those expectations, to build my own life without the weight of their demands crushing me. I also learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I forgave my father because I understood his weaknesses, his desire to do right by the people he loved, even if it meant hurting others. I forgave Ash because I saw her for what she was, a product of her upbringing. A young woman who had made mistakes but still had time to change. I couldn't forgive Marissa. Her actions went beyond mistakes. They were deliberate choices made to manipulate and control. To anyone listening who has dealt with family betrayal, know this: boundaries are not only healthy, they are necessary. They are the lines that protect your happiness, your sanity, your peace. Without them, you open yourself up to people who will take until there's nothing left. Learn from my story. Don't be afraid to say no, even if it means disappointing those you care about. Sometimes the best way to love someone is from a distance. And sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. Fiancé vanishes after leaving me with his sick son. Now his parents have disowned him and given me their house. Picture this: a seemingly perfect engagement, a loving family building their future together, and the hope of a stable life for a little boy who needed love more than anything else. But in a matter of days, everything came crashing down in the most unexpected and heartbreaking way. Let me tell you a story that will touch your heart and perhaps make you question the real meaning of love and responsibility. It all began when a young woman, let's call her Emily, found herself alone in her fiancé's house, looking after his 7-year-old son, Aiden. Emily and her fiancé, David, had been together for 2 years, and for the past 8 months, they had been engaged. Emily thought they were building something beautiful together, but life had different plans. David had a son from his previous marriage, Aiden, a bright, beautiful child with special needs. He was autistic, had some dietary restrictions, and needed assistance with daily activities. Emily loved Aiden, though she wasn't prepared for the amount of care he required. She was happy to be part of his life, learning and adapting to his needs alongside David. One day, David received a phone call from his ex-wife, Sarah. She lived 6 hours away. And from the frantic tone of David's voice, Emily could tell that something serious had happened. David said he needed to go help Sarah due to an emergency, and that he'd be back in 2 or 3 days. Emily didn't think much of it at the time. David and Sarah didn't usually speak unless it involved Aiden, so it must have been a real crisis. She wished him well and took on the task of looking after Aiden until David's return. Days passed, and David didn't come back. Each day, Emily would call, and each time, David would tell her he'd be back soon. He never gave her details of what was happening. Emily began to feel overwhelmed. Aiden, who needed consistency and routine, was now in Emily's sole care, and she was doing her best. But she wasn't his mother. She had no medical history to rely on, and she wasn't sure if she was doing things correctly. Aiden's meltdowns became more frequent, and he got sick with a fever. Emily felt utterly alone. She began to wonder, what was really happening with David? Why was he so vague? Was there really an emergency? Or was he hiding something? The doubts gnawed at her, and as the days turned into a week, Emily grew more frustrated. She loved Aiden, but this wasn't what she'd signed up for. She had always seen David as a dedicated father, but his behavior now made her question everything. Emily debated whether she should reach out to David's parents. She didn't want to embarrass him, but she also felt she had to protect Aiden. Eventually, her concern for Aiden's well-being outweighed her hesitation, and she called David's parents. To her surprise, they were shocked. They had no idea David had even left town. Without hesitation, they offered to come over and help with Aiden. That was when Emily decided to call the police to perform a welfare check on David and Sarah. The police got back to her, telling her that David and Sarah were both fine, there was no emergency. Privacy laws prevented them from giving more information, but the message was clear. David was not in any danger. When Emily heard this, her heart sank. She couldn't believe what was happening. David finally called that night, and Emily answered with both relief and rage. David told her, calmly, that he wasn't coming back. He said he and Sarah had decided to try their marriage again, and that he believed Aiden would be better off staying with Emily and his parents. Emily was stunned. The man she thought she knew, a devoted father, had abandoned his child because he found it too challenging to care for Aiden while rekindling his old relationship. Emily's shock quickly turned into anger. She told David exactly what she thought of him, how he was a coward and a terrible father. She threatened to inform the authorities that Aiden had been abandoned. When she hung up, she was shaking. She turned around and saw Aiden standing in the doorway, holding his iPad, asking, "Where's Daddy?" Emily's heart broke. How could she explain this to a child who depended on his father? Who needed stability more than anything? David's parents arrived soon after, and Emily told them everything. They were devastated. David's father, a usually calm and composed man, was visibly enraged. While his mother broke down crying, they all spent the night talking, feeling the weight of betrayal and uncertainty. By morning, they had made a plan. They went to the police station and spoke to a lawyer about gaining custody of Aiden. David's parents made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with their son if he was capable of abandoning his child. They disowned him, saying they had raised him better than this. In the days that followed, Emily and David's parents worked together to create a stable environment for Aiden. They filed for emergency custody and began the process of becoming his legal guardians. Emily took on the responsibility of caring for Aiden, even though it wasn't easy. She visited doctors and therapists, joined support groups, and learned everything she could about raising an autistic child. David's parents were incredibly supportive, helping Emily every step of the way. One evening, a month after David had left, Emily sat on the porch, exhausted but determined. David's mother joined her, asking how she was holding up. Emily admitted that it was hard, but she was managing. David's mother told her how much they appreciated everything she was doing for Aiden. Emily, with tears in her eyes, said she loved Aiden and couldn't imagine walking away from him, no matter how hard it got. David's mother smiled sadly and said, "That's what it means to be a parent. It's unfortunate our son couldn't understand that." As they sat there, watching the stars, Emily realized how much her life had changed in such a short time. A month ago, she was planning a wedding and a future with David. Now, she was raising his child, with his parents by her side. It wasn't the life she had envisioned, but she found herself beginning to love it. Aiden had captured her heart, and she was determined to give him the love and stability he deserved. David and Sarah eventually moved out of state, and the police continued to investigate David's actions. Emily didn't care much about what happened to him, she just hoped he stayed away. Her focus was on Aiden and giving him the best life possible. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she was ready to face them, surrounded by people who loved Aiden as much as she did. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about resilience, love, and the unexpected paths life can take. Emily never imagined she'd be in this position, but she embraced it fully. She found purpose in caring for Aiden, and in doing so, she discovered a strength she never knew she had. Sometimes, the family we choose ends up being stronger than the one we're born into. And for Aidan, the love he received from Emily and his grandparents was more than enough to help him heal and grow.